First of all, I'd like to thank Glenn very, very much. And I'd like to thank Ken and everyone here for inviting us. We've only been here a short time, but we absolutely love Pensacola. We are, after our kids playing at Flounders last night for several hours, we're considering moving here. But having been through several natural disasters with John Edwards as a presidential candidate, as a senator, I know how traumatic a pending disaster is, and I just want you to know our hearts go out to you and our prayers go out to you. I also want to have a very special thank you to Glenn Sturm. Glenn was the first person, despite all the newspapers and TV reports and nationwide gossip about me, to believe in me and my family and to actively stand beside us when the world thought the worst. In the middle of the chaos, he put me and my wife on a plane to his home in Jackson Hole, and he gave us love and respect and a belief that we could speak truth to the tremendous and intimidating, scary power of John Edwards and his friends. I hope you get a chance to meet him. I hope you have someone like him in your life. He has true courage. I'd also like to say a word of love for my wife, Sherry, sitting right here, who stood by me through it all, finding solution after solution. There's no one tougher anywhere, more beautiful, or more strong. I want to start the speech with a sincere, from the heart apology. I'm truly sorry for taking part in the deception and manipulation that destroyed the chance that my former friend John Edwards had in making our country a better place at a time where it desperately needed strong leadership. I apologize for the distress it may have caused you personally, the thousands of dedicated donors, volunteers, or voters. I can paint it as pretty as I want. I can give reasons for what I was thinking when I made these idiotic decisions. But nothing will justify my actions. At a time when public faith in the political system was at an all-time low, I was sucked into the money and the power of presidential politics. I wanted it all for me and my family, and I participated in a stupid plan to get my guy elected President of the United States, and I dragged my family into it. For all of that, I will always be sorry. At this point, the only thing that I can do is tell the truth, the whole truth, about what happened so that everyone, including me, can learn the lessons that should be learned about the allure of power and how it can corrupt about anyone. Much to my own embarrassment, I'm a classic example of how this happens. And as painful as it is to relive the scandal, my own actions, those of John Edwards, Rielle Hunter, or Fred Barron, most of it is in the past. But we must learn from it to make the present better. And although my story is extreme, the gentlemen who are now making a movie out of the book, Aaron Sorkin and Ari Emanuel, said that no one would believe this story if somebody brought it in as a movie script. It's just too outrageous. But this story demonstrates how a split decision that you make can affect the rest of your lives, your loved ones, and many, many, many others. It's how quickly you can rise from somebody in obscurity and how quickly your life can fall apart. Whether you're an airport security guard, an engineer with BP, a CP, a secretary, a minister, a coach, a mother, or a father, you have or will make decisions that will have dire ramifications for others. I know what you're thinking. There's no way I could get in this type of positions, but scandals come in all sizes. And when it hurts somebody you love this much, it's the same thing as the whole country being hurt. The study of ethics and power go back thousands of years. I'm going to take you all from the Greeks to National Enquirer in just a few minutes. So Socrates, around 400 BC, believed that self-awareness will lead a person to do what is good if they know what is right. A leader's poor decisions only come from ignorance. Hedonists believed in immediate gratification. Eat, drink, and be merry. Tomorrow we shall die. But a serious point they made, and it's debated in D.C. even today, is killing a man right if it benefits his country or his republic. Modern studies of ethics of power focus on two theories. Consequentialism. Do the ends justify the means? A morally right action is one that produces a good outcome for society regardless of the method. This is obviously the theory that we use to come to our conclusions. Deontological ethics, primarily Immanuel Kant, argues that for leaders to act in a morally right way, it's not the consequences of the decisions that make it right or wrong, but the motives the leader uses in arriving at their choice of action. It's basically the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. No matter bad the income, virtue and truth are the most important factors in any leader's decision making. Now, as much as ever, we need strong leadership. War, unemployment, poverty worldwide, biblical disasters. And if you follow the way we're selecting our leaders today in South Carolina, Illinois, across the country, the political system has turned into a sick joke where hatred and humiliation rule. So how did I get involved in this scandal? How did I get them involved in this scandal? A friend who also worked for the Edwards and loved the Edwards dearly recently wrote about this scandal in the Huffington Post. How did this happen? This is politics, American politics, where dysfunction breeds like mold after a rainstorm. Like any story, it was a slow boil. One lie built upon another action causing a reaction, fear taking over the impulse to do what is right. In my words, we just kept throwing kerosene on a fire and wondering why it didn't go out. But we can't let the soap opera quality of this scandal or others like it make us ignore the lessons. Americans and the world in general have long since given up on improving our political system. We are viewed worldwide as teenagers given the keys to the fastest car and an unlimited credit card. The daily announcements of another politician or business leader's financial impropriety, sex scandal, or ethical violation is ignored. Late-night jokes, tawdry tabloids, blogs and newspapers rain down judgment after judgment. And it causes all of us to look away and act like the leader who caused the latest impropriety isn't like the rest of our leaders or people who are considering for leadership positions. Our most meager of expectations of our politicians are lowered time and time again, and we never stop to examine how we can improve our system so this won't happen again. In this case, my case, we try to act like John Edwards wasn't a legitimate candidate for the White House. Sex scandals have happened over and over again in the United States and the world history, and nothing has changed. Each time we act like it's a rare occurrence, when in truth we never learned about 90% of the scandals, and that's just a low number. It didn't begin with or end with Gary Hart, Bill Clinton, John Edwards. Just this week, Representative Souder, Mark Sanford, Nevada Senator John Ensign, Mark Foley with the Pages, the Tickler, Eric Massa, Idaho Wide Stance Larry Craig, or the Sheriff of Wall Street, Elliot Spitzer. Just recently, just last week, former Staten Island Representative Vito Foselli, the one who resigned after they found out that he had 2 separate married families with children, has just been renominated and is the overwhelming favorite. There are tons of reported but unproven affairs. Just this week, the National Enquirer is reporting that they have proof of Obama and a woman named Vera Baker. You might laugh, but that's how it started with John Edwards. John McCain, Vicki Eisman, John Kerry, Alexander Polier, the first Bush with his appointment secretary. And these are just recent sex scandals. I can't even begin to talk about the volumes of scandals like Blago or Abramoff. Scandals aren't discovered for decades, if ever. And sadly, catching a politician isn't news anymore. So how did it happen to us? As with so many careers or businesses or athletes or candidates who have quick success, we were starstruck. I read recently, "Don't fear failure. Success ruins many more people." I've come to realize that is so true. That's why I'm here talking to you about power and ethics. In less than 9 years, I and the man I worked for went from normal, reputable people in North Carolina who no one had ever heard of, they all thought he was the psychic, John Edward, to within steps of the most powerful positions and the powerful offices in the world. 3 times in 9 years. He hadn't even voted prior to that. It ended as the #1 political scandal of the decade, and it's one that will not soon be forgotten. Personally, I grew up the son of a prominent minister in the violent South of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. At a time when civil rights and equal rights, when marches, riots, sit-ins, and hatred were the societal norm and on TV nightly, my father and his contemporaries stood up for the rights of minorities and women. We had crosses burned in our yard, rocks thrown through our windows, and callers regularly threatened to rape and kill my mother. My father and his friends, leaders like Governor Terry Sanford, Julius Chambers, Dr. C. Eric Lincoln, and William Friday, lived the fight in North Carolina during these times. My father, who was a redneck, born to rednecks in western North Carolina, the first in his family to go to college, was not expected to be this type of leader, especially in a socially conservative atmosphere like the prestigious Duke Chapel, where he preached for over a decade. And ironically, to the story that I'm involved in, it's also where he had an affair that ended his brilliant career in his 40s and broke my family completely apart. Growing up around these leaders, I dreamed big, and I had great expectations of helping change the world for the better. As an adult, chasing these dreams, I completely lost my perspective. And that's what happened with Edwards and with me right behind him. In 1998, when I met him, he was a good guy, with idealism just pouring out of him. I can't tell you what a great guy he was back then. The first 5 years I worked for him, he had great potential, and at the end, politics changed him. When Sherry and I first met him, he spoke to a group of powerful trial lawyers and he swept them off their feet. His son had just recently died in a tragic accident, and he was recovering from the death. And one day he watched the movie American President. And this guy who had never voted, who had no previous experience, didn't even know what school vouchers were, decided to run for U.S. Senate with the plans of eventually running for the president. No experience. He didn't have any policies, just a call for change, hope, and help for the defenseless. If that sounds familiar, it might be. It came up in the last election. But he had charisma and he had idealism. North Carolinians didn't think he had a shot, so this crowd was kind of sparse. But after a few minutes of talking, he vividly painted a picture of those his campaign, our campaign, would be about. He actually had us all close his eyes with the line and dream about who these people would that his campaign would affect. He closed his powerful speech with a line from Gandhi, that we should be the change that we've all waited for, that we can make things better. He was elected with grand sweeping ideas that made us believe we could work nationally to help people in small personal ways. I felt like he was the JFK of our generation, that we were going to change the world. And soon, after telling my wife, after hearing him speak one time, he was going to be President of the United States, I landed a low-level job and started working my tail off. And it wasn't just me and the lawyers who were starstruck with this new man. Time magazine called him the natural. The Democrats called him the new golden boy. The New Republic said he was a once-in-a-generation talent, more gifted than Clinton. Pat Leahy called him the best debater the Senate had seen in 25 years. And Hollywood and Wall Street loved him. People magazine named him the sexiest politician alive. And overnight, he went from eating buffalo wings with me in North Carolina to having lunch with Warren Buffett, dinner with Warren Beatty and Annette Bening, and drinks with John McCain and Ted Kennedy. And drip, 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 it started. John and Elizabeth Edwards both began to see themselves as larger than life and entitled to anything. And instead of seeking to serve the nation, they began to expect to be treated like royals who should be granted every wish because they were willing to share themselves with the world. And we all enabled them, sharing their bright visions of saving the world and our dreams of sharing that with them. I would go from getting gigantic donations or pulling off some minor miracle, we need a jet in 30 minutes in Port St. Lucie, to, Andrew, can you pick up Kate at the airport? I don't want her to have to take a taxi. Or one day after I'd just gotten a $2.25 million donation to permanently endow the Poverty Center at the University of North Carolina. Can you clean up my house? How about picking up a Christmas tree for us? If you don't do it, I'll have to, and I won't have time for this meeting. I love you, man. I love you. Do it for the cause. We're all sacrificing. We all acted as enablers. We took one for the cause by making excuses for broken campaign promises, ignoring constituent requests to focus on bigger matters, or did embarrassing personal favors. We rationalized this was for the cause, but it was also a once-in-a-lifetime chance, to work with a viable world leader who could affect positive change. And it worked. He was fast-tracked to the presidency by us, and then by political superstars like Ted Kennedy and John McCain and others, and then by the national media. And although he was an overnight star, John was frustrated by the reality of being a senator. He found out legislating is mind-boggling slow, and that he had to spend time with the people he represented, those down-to-earth folks. He wasn't crazy about that. Fundraising took 40% of his time, and he didn't like begging for money. He had to compromise his ego and values to get anywhere or anything in the Senate. And in the beginning, he hated D.C., which is 6 square miles of ego where everyone thinks the world revolves around them. There's an old joke that the first thing every senator sees in the morning is a future president in the mirror. Soon he asked me to come to D.C. to be his assistant, and I almost got fired in my first couple of days. I accidentally was using the line reserved for other senators in the White House to call the senator. All of a sudden, the senator's private door boomed open. I had 2 phones on each ear, and the buzzer was ringing that I didn't know what it meant. And Senator Kennedy was screaming at me, holding a huge dog, about how I was keeping him from making John Edwards president because I didn't answer, and I'm paraphrasing here, the gosh darn phone. The next day, I saw a very different, friendly Kennedy, who asked me how my first week in D.C. was going. I told him he'd had a couple of bottles of wine, so he was a little bit more friendly. I told him I was working and sleeping, and it was hectic. He looked at me and replied, "Yeah, the media sure has changed things. Back when I got here," and I'm kind of like the grasshopper talking to the great man, and he says, "Back when I got here, it was civilized. We'd get our work done by 1 or 2, and then we'd be over at the White House." You know, my brother was the president back then. So. Yes, I know that. Chasing women and drinking with the press. A long pause. It was civilized. That was my welcome to D.C. But John Edwards decided not to stay frustrated for long. He made a gigantic national impression during his powerful speech on the Clinton impeachment hearings. Soon he was seen by pundits as the perfect politician. An almost photographic memory, disciplined, charismatic, a great fundraiser, no record to attack, and he could bring the South into contention for the Democrats. And at a time when Clinton was the dominant force in D.C., Edwards had a seemingly perfect family story, which was in strong contrast to that of the Clintons. Then, in 2000, only 1.5 years after he was elected for the first time, no previous experience, Al Gore, either, depending on who you listen to, either picked him and then changed his mind, or he was a close number 2 to Lieberman for vice president. Although he passed him over for vice president, Gore, by doing so, placed him on a national stage as a presidential contender. That night, watching the returns, and especially y'all down here in Florida, the senator and I stayed up all night watching the returns, just he and I. About 2 a.m., he began talking about running if Gore lost, about us in the White House, about us helping people worldwide. It was intoxicating, and when I left at dawn, there seemed like nothing we couldn't do, except for turning to the next page. When Gore and Lieberman lost, Edwards immediately started planning a run for the presidency. When we talked about his experience, his lack of a platform, his lack of any legislative accomplishments, how crazy it was, he said he had to go for it because the door to the Oval Office rarely cracks open. And there was truth to what he said. There was little competition because there was a huge vacuum in the Democratic Party. Edwards had that Clinton populism down, and he promised to finally start reading the daily briefing books and those little security reports that he got daily. It's also important to note that with this election, the vetting of presidential candidates drastically changed in the short time he'd been in office. Before 2000, contenders had to be longtime party leaders, military leaders, or business leaders, someone who had been vetted over time. You knew what you were getting when you put these people up there. But then, as now, the public vetting was done on 30-second sound bites, 24-hour TV news shows, or political blogs. A good-looking candidate with the ability to raise money like Edwards could become a contender overnight. Experience was now a liability because the other side could attack voting records on key issues like votes on partial birth abortion, Iraq, or taxes. The overwhelming influence of the internet and the 24-hour news cycle has united and educated our country in many ways, but it has very much divided us in many other ways. The hatred in politics is now palpable, and politicians rarely are respected. The herd mentality of the press, who can follow a supposed boy in a balloon for days and debate world issues like a wrestling match, petrifies me. One reporter says something about swine flu or a gigantic swath of oil hitting the beach on Pensacola, and the hordes of the media descend. I miss Walter Cronkite, and I miss Tim Russert. At the same time Edwards began his rise, he and I became close friends. We went to UNC basketball games, trips to the beach, and Disney with the kids. We jogged, and we logged thousands and thousands of miles from one political event to another. He became a big brother to me, and Elizabeth a big sister. He treated and called me a friend, like no other staff member, and I believed him. And presidential politics is powerful. It's almost cult-like we're being a member of the mob. It's us against them. And loyalty on the senior levels is priceless. So only a few years after being elected for the first time, Edwards ran for the presidency. In his defense, it was like he had an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other telling him to do the same thing. The angel told him to run for the greater good, to be able to make the positive change that he had come to D.C. for. The devil whispered, money, power, attention. And so he ran for president in 2004, and he ran hard. One top senator appropriately described him as the most crudely ambitious politician he had seen in his 30-year career. He quickly took the lead in fundraising. He was the early leader in most polls. But the strong team of seasoned advisors clashed on his strategy, and he faltered and dropped. Just a month before the 2004 election returned, he had dropped to 6th or 7th place. He was sick, and he was miserable. He called me one night, and we talked about he wasn't being himself, how angry he was with his advisors, and he said he was going to stop listening to them. The next interview I saw with him on the next day, he was back, still sick, but he was back. He was in New Hampshire on the CNN campaign bus with Tucker Carlson and Paul Begala, and he was on fire. In weeks, he went from 6th or 7th to within the margin of error with Kerry and narrowly lost. His ascent was so rapid that pollsters told us he would have won if the caucuses had only been held 2 or 3 days later. Many forget, but there was a widely reported affair between Kerry and Alexander Polier, another staffer, that almost handed us the nomination. But we were broke in New Hampshire, having invested all of our money in Iowa. Literally, when he landed in New Hampshire, I couldn't pay for the rental cars to pick him up. He continued to pick up second-place finishes, but eventually withdrew. He and I went to his beach house, and he immediately started plotting on how to get the vice presidential nomination. Our families were at Disney together at Chef Mickey's when John Kerry and all of his staff started calling and asking him to come up to D.C. to become his vice presidential nominee. The Magic Kingdom was quite a backdrop for this. Within months, we were in Boston accepting the nomination, and looking back, it was the high point. But it was also when Barack Obama's keynote stole the show that led to his presidency in 2008. In my opinion, Edwards and Kerry lost the 2000 election out of pure arrogance. They lost, by Ohio, 100,000 votes, a football stadium. And they left $15 million in the bank that surely would have won the election for them. It was surreal on Election Day. I and Sherry were out on a duck boat tour, one of these old World War II amphibious vehicles. He had asked me to distract him while the returns came in. About around 4 o'clock, they called us and told us we had won, and for us to rush back to Copley Plaza to celebrate. We were moving into the vice presidential mansion. So we went back and listened to Bon Jovi and The Rain with the Thousands. All of us went to dinner, the families and close friends like Glenn Sturm. We went up at announcement time and hung up with the politicians and celebrities like Christy Brinkley, Larry David, Peter, Paul, and Mary. And like 2000, we lost in a confusing long night of debatable polls and reports of voter tampering. At 4 a.m., John Kerry was unable to address the crowd that had stood out in the pouring rain all day, and he had Edwards go out to address the crowd and tell them to wait. The day after the loss, we found out that Elizabeth had cancer. So overnight, we went from sitting in Boston Harbor, thinking we were moving into the vice presidential mansion, to being unemployed. There's nothing like presidential politics. We had to deal with Elizabeth's illness, the loss, and whether we had a job or health insurance to take care of our kids. At Elizabeth's request, I was the only staff member that was kept on. And soon after I knew I had a job, I quickly realized that John Edwards was the most likely nominee for 2008, despite the loss and despite the fact that he was no longer a sitting senator. There was little competition. Gore and Kerry were done because they'd had their shot. Daschle was the strongest Democrat, but he was not seen as presidential fiber. Hillary and Obama were then seen as possible vice presidential nominees in 2008, but most likely as potential 2012 candidates. And the drip, drip, drip continued. The vice presidential run with the Secret Service and the personal jets and his time with the Kerrys actually made him much, much worse. As soon as he ran, he started to lose what made him special. Politics changed him. And with it, what made me believe in him and what made me love him so much. I admit that I missed many signs that I should have seen because of his rapid-fire success. He had middle-of-the-night jogs, strange calls to my cell phone from women, or towels stuck under the door of his hotel rooms. And then there was the way that he tossed aside talented, hardworking people from North Carolina who were loyal to him and helped him get elected in the first place in 1998, and brilliant national advisors like David Axelrod, who he called an idiot when he fired him, and is now Barack Obama's right-hand man, or Juliana Smoot, who they fired and said similar things, who went on to raise $750 million. $750 million. To put that in perspective, in 2004, both candidates combined raised less than half that. Hardworking friends like Glenn, donors, and volunteers were completely ignored. When people called and who had helped him, he would say, I don't have a time for their advice. I need their money. I don't have time to talk to them. So for over 2 years, from 2004 to 2006, the Edwards were treated as the first family in waiting, as they traveled the world meeting with world leaders, movie stars, and hanging out with billionaires. He even had a jacket with the number 49 for 49th president made on a leather jacket. So soon after 2004, the traits that had made him so special started to disappear, everything except for the charisma. I've often said that he had everything you could possibly want in a president, except for a platform and ethics. This new attitude led to what the staff called the 3 H's. The 30,000 square foot mansion or house, the hedge fund job, which paid him $500,000 a year for doing little for a group that opposed most of what his platform stood for, and of course the most expensive haircuts that were so widely reported. There was a 4th H dealing with Rielle, but we won't talk into that. I was disappointed but not surprised when I started to figure out his affair in 2006, but I was so caught up in my own ambitions, I ignored and overlooked it. And by the time the rumors of the affair started to become public, Edwards was leading in Iowa, which has predicted 5 out of the last 7 nominees, and he was rising quickly in New Hampshire. John Edwards met Rielle Hunter in early 2006 when he was doing a tour with Danny Glover with labor leaders to improve hotel wages. He and Rielle slept together the first night and continue to see each other now. I never thought he had affairs until 2006. My father had suffered from an affair that broke our family apart, and I admit, I looked for it. I didn't see it. I should have. But after Rielle, it's absurd for any senior staff that was around the Edwards for more than 5 minutes to say that they didn't know that something was going on. And some of these people work in high levels in the current administration. Rielle is a spiritualist who believes she can foretell the future. She believes she and John's baby is a reincarnation of a Buddhist monk that died shortly before the baby was born, and that the baby is a combination of her abilities and Edwards, his charisma, and so on and so forth, and that the baby has been sent here to save the universe. Elizabeth began tracking the calls of every staffer around the Edwards, around the senator, so they used my personal cell phone to make contact with each other. After a few months, Rielle told me they were sleeping together, and I became an enabler. One night he called me late from a bar to have her put on payroll. She was hired to do what she called webisodes, or a look at what a presidential campaign really is like behind the scenes. She traveled with him almost continuously until December when Elizabeth had her fired. And he became stranger and stranger. I went with him to the hospital for a procedure on one of their children. After the child was fine, he and I walked to the cafeteria for some coffee, and I suggested we call his family. He agreed, and we called his parents. Next, I suggested we call his brother, his sister, his other loved ones. He looked at me with a smirk and said, we ought to call make some fundraising calls to top fundraisers and donors. He thought, it'll make him feel special if I call him from the hospital. It'll help him become more dedicated. I was with him as he did similar scary drop-ins at funerals just for a few minutes to make people feel that he was dedicated to them. He was scary. My relationship with Elizabeth also began to deteriorate. And I later found out that every time she got suspicious of a note, a call, anything, he blamed it on me. And because we were with each other almost all the time, it worked perfectly. Strangely, this made us as close as ever. He opened up to me about his true feelings about Elizabeth and about Rielle. He started to tell me way more than I wanted to know. But he was also leading in nationwide polls, and I was raising millions and millions of dollars. So I admit it was a very heady time for me. After one huge blowout screaming match with Elizabeth that canceled an event, I cleared out the VIP holding area and had a heart-to-heart with him. I told him I believed in him, that he could be a great president, and that he could affect positive change. But he had to deal with his relationship with his wife. They didn't love each other anymore. She had run all of the talented, dedicated staff off from 1998 and 2004. I had begged him to talk to her, work out something, but you can't keep canceling events to deal with your situation. I said this to him, and even as far gone as he was, I was still shocked when he responded, Andrew, I can't divorce her. She's more popular than I am in Iowa and New Hampshire. I looked at him shocked. Not I love her, she's the mother of my children, but no, she's more popular than I am in Iowa. I need her to win. In the fall, things began to completely fall apart. Rielle traveled with him to Africa for a humanitarian tour, and the staffer with him was floored and petrified at how obvious they carry on. When they returned, he came home, dropped his bags, and fell asleep. Unfortunately, he forgot to turn off the secret phone that Rielle had purchased for him. She called, and Elizabeth answered the phone and didn't say anything. Elizabeth woke up John Edwards and told him to call her in front of her, and end the affair. Elizabeth didn't know who it was. It was just another woman, but it was only 2 months before he announced his candidacy. Immediately after that, the staffer who had gone to Africa with him talked to me and to several other staffers. Edwards heard about it, and within days at the JFK airport, en route to China, Edwards fired him for being disloyal. In December, he announced his candidacy dramatically in jeans and a rolled-up work shirt from the front room of a devastated home from Katrina. Elizabeth was not with him, but Rielle was. That afternoon, they came back to North Carolina to have a national campaign kickoff. I picked them up about 2 or 3 p.m., and they were already drinking. They were drinking wine out of water bottles so police wouldn't notice or think anything of it. By the end of the night, Elizabeth had noticed Rielle, realized who she was, and had her fired. But the affair continued. But there were several close calls. Once, Rielle overslept in his hotel room, and I got a call at 7 a.m. because 2 or 3 staffers with 2 large security guards were beating on her door. I got her out of this only to have John Edwards deny it to me 2 days, deny that it ever happened, despite the fact that he and I had spoken at least a dozen times as I fixed it. And the drip, drip, drip continued. In March, the campaign was in full swing, and around March 20th, Rielle's birthday, Elizabeth cancer returned, and it was terminal. When I was with Edwards, he broke down, visibly devastated. And as he was going to be with Elizabeth, he had me call Rielle and tell her that she wasn't going to be there with him to celebrate her birthday. Rielle didn't care about the terminal cancer and threw a fit. Within hours of their dramatic press conference that the campaign must go on despite her cancer, because the issues were so pressing and so important, they started scheming how they could maximize Elizabeth in appearances to get some much-needed press attention and money. It worked. He quickly rose up again in the polls and was doing well as summer approached. The media covers politics now like a soap opera, and the dominant theme of the 2008 campaign was the chance of a historic election of electing a minority. Whether you liked Romney, McCain, Paul, Clinton, Obama, or Edwards, Clinton and Obama received more than their share of press attention. And in politics, press coverage drives money, which drives the polls, which drives more money, which drives more press. Most people don't know this, but after the first quarter of fundraising in a presidential election, reporters stop covering candidates, even if they're the best candidates in the world. They stop covering them unless they're in the top 3 in fundraising. In May, Rielle called me crying and hysterical, demanding to talk to him immediately, or she would go public. I called his body man and said I needed to speak to him, but he was in the middle of a major national interview and could not be interrupted. I got 3 or 4 more calls. She was hysterical, and she told me she was pregnant. I quickly got him on the phone. In his typical fashion, he asked me to handle this, as I always did. I told him I couldn't, and he found a place away from the interview and from Elizabeth, and he called her. He tried to get her to have an abortion, and then he tried to convince me to get her to do so. He called her derogatory names and said it couldn't be his. We later heard a rumor that at the same time she was seeing actor Jeff Goldblum and had told him that the baby was his as well. When she refused to have an abortion, it was clear John Edwards needed money to take care of this, and he asked me to find it. I asked some of his friends, and a wonderful woman who loves him and who happens to be one of the wealthiest women in the world, who is Jackie Kennedy's best friend, said of course. She didn't know it was for a mistress. It was only to help him and not related to the campaign. And she soon sent hundreds of thousands of dollars, close to $1 million. The Huffington Post and the National Enquirer somehow heard rumors about Rielle, and the Enquirer sent dozens of reporters out. They found Rielle in New Jersey, and Edwards called me and asked if she could come stay with Sherry and I for a short time. She came, and she didn't leave for almost a year. And this is where it gets bizarre. Edwards decided, since Rielle was now visibly pregnant and due in a few months, for me to get a house near mine in Chapel Hill. That way, whenever he was home, he could act like he was coming to see me and actually go visit her. At this time, he was really heating up in the campaign and the polls, and Elizabeth was tremendously popular. And then the National Enquirer caught Rielle and took a picture of her visibly pregnant within miles of our house and within miles of Edwards' house. We live like 2 or 3 miles apart. I should note that the mistress of the universal health care that promoted universal health care, his mistress didn't have health insurance, but that's another matter. That night they came to mine, Sherry's house, and when we caught them taking pictures of our children through the window. We knew the charade was coming to an end. And the next day while Sherry and I were in PetSmart buying a turtle aquarium, and then we went through McDonald's to get a Happy Meal for our son, Edwards asked me to claim that I was the father of the child. For any of y'all who are in a situation in the future, asking your wife in the McDonald's Happy Meal line is not a very good place to ask. So that was how the drip, drip, drip ended up with my family being asked to take one for the team. He threw in the soldiers in Iraq, for the millions in poverty, so that his dying wife wouldn't find out, for loyalty, for my job security, for a bright future for me and my family. And we only had a few hours to make a decision. It was surreal and scary. And when he said, we just can't tell Elizabeth about this affair right before she dies, all 3 of us, Sherry, Rielle, and myself, agreed. We followed the time-tested plan of dealing with any ethical dilemma, just like Clinton, Tiger, Wall Street, or BP right now. We ignored, denied, covered up, blamed others, and hired a bunch of lawyers until we were forced to tell the truth. And the crazy thing, everybody asked me, how the heck did we think this would work? The crazy thing is but for the National Enquirer, this story worked. From December, before the caucuses started, until Obama was elected, July 22nd, he was the leading nominee at times for president or a shoo-in for vice president or attorney general. But for him being caught at the Beverly Hilton, he probably would be attorney general right now. Over time, I realized I had placed us directly in the middle of a plan to game the presidency, and we were between two billionaires, several millionaires, and many very powerful people not wishing us well. We were justifiably scared for our lives. We got the kids packed, the animals all sheltered, and we disappeared on a private jet early in the morning. We could go wherever Rielle wanted, and we did. From fancy penthouses in Miami to a gigantic estate in Aspen to San Diego, and then finally to a Santa Barbara $20,000 a month rental that Rielle insisted on because it had the right energy and it was close to her spiritual advisor. Of course, Edward's lost and dropped out in January, and the baby was born in February. And then he and Rielle both stopped speaking to Sherry and I. They were done with us. And we were told to sell our house in North Carolina, move somewhere else, and never come back. He was now the leading contender for vice president. Both Clinton and Obama made trips to his Chapel Hill home courting his support. He planned on using his delegates to get them to name him vice president. He had a bunch of delegates. He planned on the split convention, and he thought that he could walk in and pick who the actual president would be. He and Obama really hit it off, playing horse in the Edwards indoor full-length basketball court. I don't think he and Hillary played horse. In June, after not hearing from him for about 3 months, I demanded a meeting, and we met in the River Inn in Georgetown. He was 2 hours late and cocky because of the standing ovations he had just received as a stand-in for Obama. I was furious, and we almost got in a fistfight. I told him how much he had changed and how disgusting it was that he now treated people who loved him as disposable. It hit a nerve, and the next day he called me and told me repeatedly he wasn't sure what he was going to do about how I spoke to him. It was a threat. He was on top, and he was untouchable. The next month he was caught at the Beverly Hilton with his mistress and child. He soon did a dramatic interview on ABC, which still implied I was the father. Soon after that, the grand jury asked me a bunch of questions, and his career and his popularity plummeted. Still, we continued to receive threatening emails and phone calls from Edwards and their supporters, blaming us for all that went wrong. Then Glenn called and brought us to Jackson Hole. He helped us learn that we could and should tell the truth, despite how scary the Edwards power was. But I waited for over 2 years, giving Edwards a chance to tell the truth, and he didn't, until just a few days before my book launched. And even then, he didn't do it himself. He hired a surrogate to do it for him, and then he went to Haiti, supposedly to do help. Almost a year ago exactly, we finally decided to write our book. The book launched in January with an hour-long special on ABC and was accompanied by a lawsuit from Rielle. Within 3 days, the book was number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list and hit all the nationwide bestseller lists in a week. I was on Hardball, Good Morning America, Oprah, and had to have 40 million listeners on BBC. I was a little scared. Now, Aaron Sorkin, Ari Emanuel, and Scott Rudin are making it into a feature movie. It didn't all go smoothly. Oprah and The View scared the heck out of me. George Stephanopoulos gave me a hard time, and I wanted to remind him about his work with Clinton and Paula Jones, Jennifer Flowers, and Monica Lewinsky. And about how he had talked in his book, and this is something that was true from him and true for a lot of people who work for powerful people. How he talked in his book about when you're working for somebody like that, you balance working for something that can dramatically impact the world and how you can help people, and how in that position you see that the people that you are working for are human and have frailties and weaknesses and fights and adultery. And you balance what's more important. George and I both chose wrong. During one of our last interviews about a month ago, I forgot my shoes and had to go on national TV with borrowed dirty cowboy boots. Immediately after the interview, my mom called me and said she didn't quite love that. The celebrities, the $500,000 jobs, and the adoring crowds are long gone now, and they've been replaced by regular jokes that make fun of him. His joke is almost a pejorative adjective now. But the causes that we fought for remain. $40 million in poverty, health care war, on and on. There's a popular song out right now that says, "We are all just one phone call from our knees." When I hear that, I think of how we build our storm-proof homes, build our bank accounts, and inoculate our children. And all I think about when I see these disasters is something that he used to say, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." He used to close his speeches with, "I have learned 2 lessons in life. The first is that heartache and struggle will always be with us. We can never make it go away. The other is that people of strong and goodwill can make a difference. One lesson is a sad lesson. The other is inspiring. I choose to be inspired." For all of John Edwards' flaws, he could inspire people to do good things for others. We need that now more than ever. I have to believe that for me and for all of you, despite all the things that we're going through right now, there are better things ahead, and that we need to try to learn from this part of history. A place like Washington, Wall Street, here, or Chapel Hill, our home, must start and end with integrity in leaders and their support staff. There's no shortcuts. This has lessons for us all. Power corrupts on all levels. And you too, whether you think that something like this could happen to you, it might happen on a much lower level, you too can make a decision that can impact and hurt many, many others, and do it without really thinking that it will. I hope you all have learned something from the pain that we've gone through. Thank you for having me tonight. And again, I apologize for my part in this. I'm honored to be here. And I'm happy. I'm happy to take any questions, harsh if you don't throw apples, about any of it. Yes, sir.
Was it a split second decision, or did you have time to think about it before you make that claim?
We had about 6 to 8 hours, which I would consider 6 to 8 decision. I believe it was a split-second decision. When you're making a decision with those type of ramifications, we had about 6 or 8 hours because we thought that the National Enquirer was coming out the next morning with the pictures of Rielle and the pictures of our family. That's not an excuse. We made an awful and stupid and wrong decision, but it was a very short time. So, yes, ma'am. I usually get asked, what the heck were you thinking? But
I grew up inside the Beltway in McLean, and I saw firsthand. I mean, you couldn't pull out of the driveway without hitting a politician. And
you should have.
So I saw what their lifestyles and their children's, and right. And you knew, you were in it for years. You pretty much knew that going to funerals and saying hi and that sort of thing, that was pretty much modus operandi right. for politicians. So that was nothing new.
Right.
I think it's probably easy for all of us to be revisionist and periodically vilify somebody because we had a hard time with them.
Right.
Should we vilify him? Should we vilify you? Should we vilify neither of you? I don't think vilifying is the answer.
Both of us. I admit my culpability.
It's not so black and white. But my question is, at what point did you see, or did you take off the rose-colored glasses and see, it was like a communist parade in Beijing. There was red flags everywhere. At what point did you see that parade?
He had always been an arrogant man, but it was kind of different with me because he would sit there and he would do some real asinine thing, but because I was like a little brother to him, when he was with me, he was different, and so I would. I'm not trying to evade the question. I'm trying to explain it. So I would see him do something to somebody, like when he fired Axelrod or Juliana. I was so angry. These were dear friends of mine, and they were brilliant people. But then he would turn right around and do something charming or great, and it was a mixed bag. And it was like he had split personalities. I noticed things here, and there, but that's why I use the words drip, drip, drip. It was like something would happen, and then there'd be good pauses. And then he would walk out in front of these crowds, and he would give this speech where you would just believe. You know, John Edwards had a gift that few people have of making a crowd. And some people have seen him when he looked like a used car salesman. He was either on or off. There wasn't an in-between. If you saw him when he was on, it was there. And so I guess what I'm saying is I saw several instances, and I admit that by 2006 I should have walked away. I should have, because I knew what was coming. But, you know, like in the book, I talk about I had a restaurant in my 20s that went bankrupt. And if you've gone bankrupt, you're petrified of going through that again. And now I've got 3 kids, 2 of them who were very sick, and a wife to support. I was desperate to hold on to this job, and I was desperate to have a future that could secure our future. Should I have left? Yes. Did I? No. And there were several other people who didn't.
What gelled it? What gelled that moment when you said, that's it?
The cancer thing. I mean, it was palpable. I mean, when they did a thing, you know, announcing that she had terminal cancer, and within hours they were talking about how they were going to use it to advance themselves in the polls. It was, you know. So does that answer your question? I'm not trying to excuse my actions. I'm not at all. I should have left earlier. I can paint it, but I was wrong. So does that I'm trying to, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to vilify you. I'm just curious.
Okay.
We
Yeah.
need to go on to
Yeah, I
a
wish I
different
could
question.
pinpoint one thing. I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
What is your message today to business leaders, or more importantly, our youth, about maintaining ethical standards?
Well, my message, you know, I'm not going to try to say that I'm the one to talk to about ethical standards. What I think that can come out of this is that there is, with, you know, the political system, with the news and the internet and everything, has so dramatically changed how we elect all our leaders, local all the way up. I think the first thing that we need to do is stop letting just people randomly decide they want to run for office. All of us, if we know somebody who is good, go after them and push, pull, drag them to run for office. Politics has become a system of multimillionaires who are just running for office for the fun of it. If you know somebody who has the ability and the ethics and believes in things, ask them to run, beg them to run, and support them when they do. If you don't do that, and you're left with these with the 2 or 3 decisions that we have to choose between somebody, ask both sides the hard questions. You know, we ask them about how they feel about school or this or that. Ask them difficult questions, both sides, your candidate and the other one. And I think that there's also, you know, there's transparency on that side, but there also has to be a transparency on the other side. Do you really want to elect somebody who is holier than thou to run in politics? I mean, it's a dirty game. You know, Barack Obama dealt with his drug use, and he went on early on, and he went on to become president of the United States. Giuliani dealt with a lot of issues, and he's still considered a viable candidate in a number of regards. But my message is not about ethics or so on and so forth. It's more about ethics of power of leaders. And I think that the system that we have right now, Iowa and New Hampshire are not representative of the United States at all. They're like 98% white, 98% middle class. It makes no sense for those 2 states to dictate who our leaders are. I think we need to change the system. My suggestion is to change it to a regional system where lesser finance candidates can compete. You know, like if they're in a regional area and they have to travel all over the place and advertise, they can compete. And we could do it within 15 days and do it and rotate it. So like the first time it's in the southeast, next time southwestern, so on and so forth. But there are several ways for us to change the political system so it makes more sense. A uniform ballot for federal elected officials. I mean, it's just absurd. And for voter fraud to have occurred the way that it did here in 2000, Ohio in 2004, it's just absurd that we haven't done something to make it better. Does that answer your question? I'm not going to pretend to answer about ethics because I'm strict ethics. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, then I'll come right here. everybody here would know a lot more about that than me.
Well, I read a lot about your background, and it's very unfortunate that your split-second decision caused you so much hurt and pain for yourself and your family. But I would like to know what is your strategy now for repairing yourself? I mean, where do you go from here? What do you do next now that you have hit that point in your life?
This is going to sound kind of cheesy, and I ended up writing the book. We started writing it for our kids. We never thought anybody would buy it. We sure as heck never thought it would be on the top of the New York Times bestseller list. At the end of the book, my father died right in the middle of this. And my dad, who was the one that got me involved in the politics in the first time. And when I was in hospice, just the night before he died, there was an old sermon of his that said, that I'd never heard before, that talked about me. I always used to get jealous when I was younger that he didn't talk about me in his sermons. He talked about the other kids. And the message in the sermon was essentially, we all try to be little Jesuses. We all try to be perfect. And when none of us can be. And all that God expects you to be is to be the best you that you can be. And that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to be true to my wife. I'm going to be true to my kids. And I'm going to try to do the best I can every day. And if somebody asks me if I screwed up, I'm going to freely admit it. I can't do anything about the past. But I think there's a lot to be learned from what we went through. I would like to participate in election reform. And the movie that we're doing and the next book that we're doing addresses that. People don't know about soft money and how unbelievable it's a whole. There are so many things that are going on. Like there are hundreds. In the middle of what's crazy is in the middle of this time when I disappeared, I raised $3.25 million. I mean, this is while I was in hiding. Politics is so. People think politics are evil and corrupt. It's a lot worse than that. It's a lot worse than that. Yes, sir.
I'm left with the impression, I hope mistakenly, that you think had John Edwards not been caught, he would have been a great president. And I guess if that's true, well, whether it's true or not, my question to you is at what point does a man's private life exceed his public life?
Two answers. I think that's two questions, so two answers to that. I had known, one of the things that I try to make clear in the book is the first 4 or 5 years, I worked for him for about a decade. The first 5 years I worked for him, he was an incredible man, inspiring. I loved him. Starting in 2004 with the Kerry election and a little bit before, but really after that, he dramatically changed. When the stuff with Elizabeth really, really flared up and I started to realize that there had been a lot of stuff that I hadn't been aware of, I realized that person that he was becoming could not be a great president. But the person that I'd worked for in the beginning, photographic memory, charisma that could lift a balloon, lift a truck. I mean, he was just, I can tell you, it was some of the highest moments of my life when we were in these rural counties in North Carolina, and he would talk to 10 or 15 people, and it was like something out of a movie. So he did have the abilities. That's what I say. By 2006, he had everything you could possibly want in a president, except for ethics and a platform. At the beginning, he had ethics and a platform, but he lost them. Politics changed him. So what I wanted to do was put these two pieces of the puzzle back together and make him a dang great president. It's not a perfect solution, but it was the best one I had. He was the only presidential candidate I was working on. So does that make sense? And was there a second question I didn't answer?
Just given everything that's going on, not just with him, but with everybody else, and the first thing that appears to occur when a person's integrity is challenged is it's not to fight for his integrity, but to fight for the viciousness in which whoever brought the thing out In other words, to turn the tables.
Right.
What I did may have been wrong, but what you did by making it public knowledge is worse.
Right. I don't disagree with that. The only thing that I would say to you is, and this is not now, but what our thinking then was, when they asked us to do this, they convinced us that they had evidence that every other viable presidential candidate had similar scandals. And so the argument that was made to us by Edwards and a few others was that it was either our candidate with a scandal or the other one with scandals. And since then, almost all of them have come out. And, you know, when you've spent 10 years and so, I'm not saying it makes, but politics in D.C. is rampant with scandals. And you just hope that you're, as much as I despise John Edwards by 2006, 2007 personally, I violently believed in the causes he espoused. And he was that representative. You know, I mean, I was truly touched by some of the education programs that we did, adopting high schools of dirt poor kids, the poverty tour that, you know, took up on what Bobby Kennedy did and LBJ did. I wanted to make those things continue, and I wanted to be a part of it, but it wasn't right.
Time for one more question.
Yes, sir. Back there in the back.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, you probably covered this, and I probably missed it, but when you admitted paternity, did you volunteer or were you asked? And if you were asked, what kind of pressure was put upon you?
I should have my wife take that, but she might throw something at me. No, we were at PetSmart buying a turtle aquarium and then going through the Happy McDonald's meal line for our kids when we were asked, and John Edwards is one of the most convincing people you'll ever want to meet. And he made all the arguments, good versus evil, so on and so forth. But the closing argument was that my wife is about to die of cancer within the next several weeks. And we can't let this be on the front page of every newspaper as she dies. And after he said that, we all agreed. It was about a 6 or 8 hour period from the initial thing to then. So we were asked, begged, cajoled. But that doesn't make it better. We made a stupid decision. I keep saying that, but so I can take one more, or it's up to y'all. Whatever.
All right, this time really is the last one.
Yeah, okay. Whoever. Yes, ma'am.
I think you addressed some of this about some of the reform you'd like to see and how things are done. But would you talk a little more about how you sort of commented about, you know, power corrupting? So, short of, you know, the obvious act of raising our children to know more. So when they're in these positions,
that's a long-term solution. That's not a short-term solution. Yeah, that's. I mean. Yeah,
but what would you? How do we keep people in office who, as you said, he started out wonderfully. I mean, you loved his platform. He had all of the tools, and how do we help? How do people not buy into the power and become corrupted by it all?
I think there's a couple things. One, I think that people that contact and work with and write in about politicians, journalists included, the vitriol needs to be removed. We need to demand that networks like Fox, NBC, CNN report the news, not their opinions. Because what it is right now, the politicians, from state senators to presidential candidates to senators, respond to this, and it's no longer about the issues, it's about us versus them. And what that leads to, and what's crazy is in D.C., these guys will be screaming at each other on hardball, and then an hour and a half later they'll be having drinks at the Monocle together playing cards. And it's just a show like wrestling. I mean, it's crazy. And so I think the first thing that I would say is, one, demand that the media go back to treating politics not like a soap opera, but an issue-oriented that affects all of us. Get the hatred out of it, and put respect back into it. The second thing that I would argue is that we need real vetting of all candidates. There ought to be a basic form that everybody who wants to run for president has to fill out. I have to fill it out to get a YMCA card. And I think that the debates have become ridiculous now. We have 12 or 13 people up there in the early debates, and it's a waste of time. We need to have the debates start early so that by the end of it, we really know who it is that we want to represent. I have a crazy idea that a lot of people disagree with, and there's a lot of legal problems with it. But I think that, but it's something that could get worked through. Right now, we are ended up left with 2 candidates for major offices. I'm not suggesting a third party, but I'm suggesting that whoever is the third most popular candidate, whichever party they're in or whether they're in a party or not, that they get not public funding because we don't have the money to do it. And I know this is crazy and people are going to, but we demand that the top 2 candidates give 5 or 10% of however much they raise to this third candidate. That can be that. I'm sorry. Well, there's a lot. It's not working now. It's not working. I'm sorry. It's not working now. But it would never be passed. But it could work. And that third tier candidate might not win. But he could inject the arguments that are left out. Because what it is right now, the candidates run to the right or run to the left to get elected. And then they run to the middle to win the general. And if we have a third tier candidate, you know, I never thought that Barack Obama would win North Carolina. I grew up in Jesse Helms, with Jesse Helms in North Carolina. So things can change, but it'll only change if people get involved. And we were talking last night about, we've been through several disasters, and we were talking about what y'all are going through right now here. I would encourage y'all have. Collectively, y'all have so much power, and this place has so much brain power. Being somebody who worked with John Edwards through several disasters, let me tell y'all, when y'all call, email, write, Facebook, Twitter, their offices and shut them down, they get scared. They get scared. So I would encourage y'all with this. After what y'all went through last week, and this Herb, we went to the restaurant the other night. They were like, it looked like our house, 20 media trucks outside. I would encourage y'all, use every organization you're in, whether it be your church, AARP, anybody that has a substantial numbers, to call not just your local leaders. Call people in Iowa. Call people who are thinking about running for president. Call email, text them, write a script for other people to send, and bombard the heck out of them. And demand town halls and demand accountability for how the money's being spent. It's beyond me why the local money that BP's spending is not being given to the local people. Y'all know this area better than BP does. But that's just my personal opinion.
On that note, let's thank